It was supposed to be a regular Tuesday afternoon on a quiet street in suburban Virginia. The sun filtered softly through the trees, and families were just starting to return from work and school. There was nothing unusual about the man walking down the sidewalk, tall, calm, dressed in a dark suit, holding a takeaway coffee in one hand and a phone in the other. His name was Marcus Ellis, and on that day he had just wrapped up a long meeting in D.C., quietly headed home to his wife and daughter. But what he didn't know was that someone had already judged him before he even had a chance to speak. Officer Bradley Simmons was on patrol, parked a few streets over. A recent transfer to the precinct, he had a reputation for being strict with the law, though some of his colleagues had quietly used another word, aggressive. That afternoon, as he cruised by, he caught a glimpse of Marcus and, without hesitation, slowed down. A black man in a suit, walking alone in a predominantly white neighborhood. Something about it didn't sit right with him. Not because Marcus was doing anything wrong, but because Officer Simmons carried with him a lens tinted with old biases and unchecked assumptions. Suspicious activity, Simmons mumbled into the radio, already turning the steering wheel. Marcus hadn't even noticed the police cruiser pulling up until he heard the doors slam behind him. "Hey, you stop right there," Simmons barked. Marcus paused, confused, turning slowly. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked, keeping his voice even cautious. Simmons didn't answer right away. He just stared, eyes narrowing. "I got a call about a man matching your description. You got ID on you?" Marcus furrowed his brow. "I'm just walking home. I haven't done anything. What's this about?" "Don't make this difficult," Simmons said sharply, already stepping closer, hand resting on his belt. "ID, now." The energy changed instantly. People nearby started peeking out their windows, unsure of what they were witnessing. Marcus slowly reached into his inner pocket to pull out his wallet. He didn't move too fast, because he knew better. Black men like him didn't get the benefit of the doubt, not with officers like this. As he handed over his ID, Simmons barely glanced at it before motioning Marcus toward the car. "Hands on the hood." "What?" Marcus asked, stunned. "You didn't even—" "Hands on the hood," Simmons yelled. And before Marcus could say another word, he was pushed forward, wrists yanked behind him. The cuffs were cold and tight, humiliating, and worst of all, unnecessary. Simmons hadn't even run his name, hadn't asked a single question. As the bystanders watched, phones began to record. But even the presence of cameras didn't slow Simmons down. He was operating on a version of the world he believed to be true, where his authority didn't need facts, just feelings. But what Simmons didn't know, what he couldn't have guessed, was that the man he'd just thrown against the hood was no ordinary pedestrian. Marcus Ellis wasn't just anyone. He was a high-ranking FBI agent. In fact, he had just returned from a classified meeting with Homeland Security. He had clearance most law enforcement officers could only dream about. He wasn't just part of the system, he helped run it, and Simmons had no idea. Back at the station, the arrest was logged casually. "Suspicious individual," Simmons wrote on the intake sheet. No evidence, no real explanation, just a gut feeling he couldn't even name. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in the holding cell, calm but focused. He wasn't angry in the way some might expect. He'd seen this happen to others. He'd heard the stories, reviewed the footage, fought the lawsuits. But experiencing it personally, being treated like a criminal for simply existing, was something else entirely. He didn't say a word to anyone, not yet. He just waited. Because when someone like him speaks, it's not with noise, it's with consequence. As the minutes ticked by, Simmons strutted down the hallway with the arrogance of a man who thought he'd done his job well. He didn't notice the growing whispers between dispatch officers. He didn't see the shift in the room. When Marcus's name was finally entered into the system, and then came the phone call, not from a lawyer, but from the director's office. "Is Agent Ellis in your custody?" the voice on the line asked, cold and direct. The officer on the other end stuttered. Ellis? Marcus Ellis. He's in holding. Release him, now." And tell your officer that a formal complaint has already been filed. He'll be hearing from the Bureau directly. Simmons didn't hear that call. He was too busy bragging to another officer about cleaning up the neighborhood. But the moment he walked into the break room and saw the look on his captain's face, he knew something had changed. The captain didn't yell. He didn't need to. He just looked Simmons in the eye and said, "You messed up. Bad." And somewhere, in the back, Marcus stood up as the cell door opened, brushing off his suit jacket with the quiet dignity of a man who didn't need to prove anything, but was about to shake the entire department. While all this was happening, across town, a young black teenager named Darius boarded a crowded city bus. He had just finished his after-school shift at the grocery store, tired but upbeat, holding a backpack that had one broken strap and a half-eaten sandwich sticking out of the side pocket. He was saving up for college, slowly, quietly, like most kids from his part of town. As the bus filled, Darius noticed a pregnant white woman step in, looking around nervously for a place to sit. Most of the passengers avoided eye contact. No one moved. Without hesitation, Darius stood and offered her his seat. "Ma'am, you can sit here," he said, flashing a small, polite smile. She looked surprised. "Are you sure?" "Yeah, my feet work just fine," he said with a chuckle. She sat down gratefully, breathing a sigh of relief. "Thank you. I really needed that." What Darius didn't know was that the woman he had just helped was not just someone's mother-to-be. Her name was Claire Richardson, and she was the wife of someone very important. But more than that, she had just experienced something rare, a moment of kindness in a world growing increasingly cold, and it moved her more than she could say. When she got off at her stop, she turned to Darius, paused, and reached into her purse. She handed him a small folded piece of paper. He looked at it, confused. "What's this?" She smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. "Just open it when you get home." Darius didn't understand. Not yet. But that note, those few lines scrawled, in pen, would change everything. 2 cities, 2 very different lives. A black man in a suit arrested for nothing. A black teen giving up his seat just because it was the right thing to do. What they didn't know was that both their actions were about to ripple across the system, expose deep truths, and flip expectations upside down. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come with sirens. Sometimes it walks quietly, wears a smile, or waits in silence until the right moment. And sometimes the smallest act of kindness shines brighter than any badge. But what did that note say? And what happened to Officer Simmons once the truth came out? Well, that's where things get even more complicated and unforgettable. Stay with us. Darius sat in the back of the bus again, this time alone, the city lights flickering outside the window as the bus rolled on. The paper note the woman had handed him was still tucked safely into his hoodie pocket, pressed tightly between his phone and his wallet. He hadn't opened it yet. Something about it felt personal, delicate. He wanted to wait until he was in his room, away from the noise and questions. He replayed the moment in his head, how surprised she looked, how kind her voice was when she handed it to him. People rarely even looked him in the eye, let alone said thank you like that. At the same time, across town, Marcus Ellis was sitting silently at his kitchen table. The house was quiet. His wife, Candace, had put their daughter to bed, but the tension still lingered in the air. She watched him from across the room as he slowly loosened his tie, his jaw tight and eyes unfocused. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked gently. Marcus took a deep breath. "I'm still trying to process it." "You?" she said softly. "Of all people? Arrested?" "It wasn't about who I was," he replied, rubbing his temples. "It was about what he thought I was." Candace didn't press further. She knew how often he held things inside, not just because of his job, but because he didn't want to bring the weight of the world into their home. But tonight, it had come in anyway. Uninvited. Cruel. Fair. Back at the precinct, Officer Simmons sat alone in the locker room staring at his badge. His captain's words were still ringing in his ears. "You messed up. No apology, no explanation. Just that cold stare and a warning that the FBI would be in touch. He thought about the moment he had cuffed Marcus, about how quickly he had acted. In his gut, he felt something, shame maybe, or was it fear? The other officers had gone quiet around him too. No one defended his actions. A few had looked down when he walked past. Others just walked away. He was starting to realize that the weight of what he did wasn't going to go away quietly. Meanwhile, Darius finally reached home, a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a worn brick building that smelled like old carpet and steamed rice. His mom was working a late shift at the hospital. His little sister was asleep on the couch, cartoons still playing softly in the background. He tiptoed past, slipped into his room, and locked the door behind him. He sat on the edge of the bed and slowly pulled out the note. The handwriting was neat, careful. "Thank you for your kindness. You didn't know me. You didn't ask for anything. But your simple gesture reminded me that grace still exists in this world. My husband and I help young people like you. If you're willing, reach out. The number below is mine, Claire Richardson." Beneath, her name was a phone number and the initials. CR, Director, Richardson Foundation. Darius stared at the note, not sure what to think. He'd never heard of the Richardson Foundation. He didn't even know if the offer was real. Maybe she was just being polite. Maybe it was nothing. But something inside him told him this wasn't ordinary, that this woman saw something in him. And whatever the Richardson Foundation was, it had weight behind it. He carefully folded the note again and placed it inside an old book on his nightstand, right next to a cracked photo of his father in uniform. A man who had served overseas but never came home. That photo was the reason Darius never gave in to the voices that told him he wouldn't make it. It reminded him of who he came from, and who he still could be. Back at the FBI's DC field office, Marcus was scheduled for a debrief with his superior. The news of his wrongful arrest had already reached the top. Word was spreading fast, not just through law enforcement circles, but through private networks, legal offices, and even the media, though no one had gone public yet. Marcus was calm as he stepped into the office, but inside, the memories of the cuffs, the hood of the car, and the look in Simmons' eyes still burned. It wasn't the first time he'd been profiled, but it was the first time it had gone this far. And now he had a choice to make. Keep it quiet and let the Bureau handle it discreetly, or shine a light on it. But Marcus wasn't just thinking about himself anymore. He was thinking about what kind of world his daughter would grow up in, what message it would send if even someone with a badge, a title, and years of service could be treated like a threat for simply walking down a street. He was beginning to realize that maybe this wasn't just about one bad officer. Maybe this was a moment to stand up for something bigger. At the precinct, Officer Simmons finally received the official notification. Internal Affairs had opened a file. The complaint was now formal, backed by both federal and civil rights officials. There would be interviews, investigations. He was placed on temporary leave. He walked to his car in silence. There was no ceremony. No goodbye, just the heavy door, clicking shut behind him, and the knowledge that everything had changed. But even now, he didn't fully understand the depth of what he had done. In his mind, he still believed he had made a judgment call. What he couldn't grasp was how dangerous that kind of thinking really was. And as Marcus sat in his office reviewing his notes for an upcoming case, his phone buzzed with a message from an old friend in Homeland Security. "I heard what happened. Want me to loop in media?" Marcus stared at the screen. The idea of going public had always felt like a last resort. But now it wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. Meanwhile, Darius couldn't stop thinking about the note. The name Richardson Foundation bounced around in his head like an echo. He didn't want to get his hopes up. But deep down, a voice whispered, maybe this was the moment everything could change. He picked up his phone, opened the contacts screen, and hovered his thumb over the Add New Contact button. He wasn't ready to call just yet, but something told him he soon would be. And just then, outside his bedroom window, a car pulled up slowly. Sleek black SUV. It paused for a moment under the streetlight, engine running. Then it pulled away. Darius didn't see it, but someone had come by, someone who knew who he was now. Across the city, Marcus received a knock on his office door. It was his assistant. "Sir, someone from the Richardson Foundation left a message. They said they'd like to speak with you about a student. Young man named Darius. Says he reminded them of someone." Marcus stood up slowly, his mind racing. Darius, that name! It rang a bell. And just like that, two lives, connected by kindness, bound by injustice, were starting to cross paths in ways no one expected. But the story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Darius didn't sleep much that night. The glow of his phone lit up the ceiling every time he turned over and checked the time. It wasn't that he wasn't tired, he was, but his mind was spinning. That note, the black SUV, the name, Richardson. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting, something bigger than him. In the early hours of the morning, as the city outside was just beginning to wake up, he finally picked up his phone and saved the number. He didn't call. Not yet. But it was there now, just a tap away. Across town, Claire Richardson was already dressed and seated in her home office, sipping coffee and scanning her emails. She had received a call late last night from a staff member about Darius. The moment she'd stepped off that bus, she'd made inquiries. She wanted to know who he was, where he went to school, what his story might be. She had a feeling about him, a kind of quiet strength that reminded her of the young people her foundation was created to help. Her husband, Walter, walked in, his phone pressed to his ear. "Yes," he was saying. "I saw the footage. It's already circulating." "Law enforcement circles? No name yet, but they know he's FBI." He paused, glancing at Claire. "No, we won't comment, not yet." He ended the call and looked at her. "It's starting to get out." Claire nodded slowly. "I figured it would." Walter placed his phone down and sat beside her. "You think the boy has any idea what's happening around him?" "Probably not," she said. "But I think he's going to find out." At the same time, Marcus was having breakfast with his daughter Amira before she left for school. She giggled at something he said, oblivious to the storm her father was navigating. But Candace noticed. She could see the look in Marcus's eyes, the quiet fire, the weight of knowing a line had been crossed, and something had to be done. "I got a message last night," Marcus said after Amira left the room. "From someone at the Richardson Foundation. They said they want to connect. About a young man named Darius." Candace raised her eyebrows. "The same woman from the bus?" He nodded. "Seems so. Maybe it's not a coincidence." Marcus leaned back, lost in thought. "No, I don't think it is." Meanwhile, Officer Simmons sat in a coffee shop on the outskirts of town, avoiding the usual places where other officers might be. He kept his head low, but he could feel the stares. He checked his phone every few minutes, waiting for a message from the union rep or some kind of update from internal affairs. But it was quiet. Too quiet. The real weight of his actions was starting to land on him. He'd been warned before, not officially, but with quiet conversations. "Watch your assumptions," someone had told him once. "You're walking a thin line." But he had dismissed it. And now that line had vanished. All that was left was the fallout. He wasn't thinking about the FBI anymore. He was thinking about what would happen if this story hit the news, about how the narrative would be shaped, about how fast a reputation could collapse in the public eye. He had spent years building a career. Now it was hanging by a thread, and he had no idea how deep this would go. Back in school, Darius tried to stay focused, but it was impossible. Every time his phone buzzed in his pocket, his heart jumped. Between classes, he kept looking over his shoulder. He didn't know what. He expected that someone might show up, that the woman might call, or that someone else might be watching. There was a weird energy around him, like he'd stepped into something far outside his control. During lunch, his friend Jamal leaned across the table. "Yo, you good? You been acting real quiet." Darius shrugged. "Just tired." Jamal didn't. Buy it. This about that woman on the bus? Darius looked up, surprised. How'd you know? I saw her give you something. My cousin works at the library, said some lady came in asking questions. About you. That got Darius's attention. What kind of questions? Like, what school you go to, where you live. Stuff like that. Said she was with some organization. Big-time people. Darius felt a chill. She came all the way out here? Jamal nodded. I'd say whatever you did on that bus, it meant something. That night, Darius sat at his desk, staring at the, number again. This time he didn't hesitate. He tapped call and held the phone to his ear. It rang twice. Then a calm, warm voice answered. Hello, this is Claire Richardson. Darius hesitated. This is Darius, from the bus. You gave me your number. She smiled on the other. Duni, Darius, I was hoping you'd call. I wasn't sure. I didn't know if it was real. It's very real, she said, and I meant every word in that note. We work with young people who show potential, kindness, courage. You didn't have to give up your seat. But you did, and it mattered. He didn't know what to say. I'd like you to meet with someone, she said. There's an opportunity we want to offer, and I think it's something you'll want to hear. Darius agreed, and they set a time for later that week. What he didn't know was that Marcus Ellis would be at that meeting, and that the Foundation had already started connecting dots between Darius, the bus encounter, and the man wrongfully arrested just blocks from his school. And while all of this was unfolding, a quiet storm was brewing inside police headquarters. The leaked footage of Marcus's arrest had started to spread. Law firms were reaching out. Civil rights groups were preparing statements. But the biggest threat wasn't just public pressure. It was what Marcus might say if he chose to go public himself. Tensions rose within the department. Leadership wanted the situation contained. Internal memos started circulating. Officer Simmons's record was being reviewed line by line, not just for this case, but for patterns. Patterns that could point to something much deeper. And, while Marcus reviewed surveillance footage for a separate federal case, a file was quietly dropped on his desk. No name, just a label. Recruit recommendation, Darius King. He stared at the name, and something inside him stirred. He didn't know yet why it felt important, but he would soon, and so would Darius. Because sometimes, what begins with a simple act of kindness can pull back layers no one expected. Layers that expose more than just injustice. Layers that uncover truth. The day of the meeting came, and Darius found himself standing in front of a glass building downtown, his palms sweaty, his heart pounding. He adjusted the collar of his best shirt, still a little too big, and stepped through the front doors. The lobby was quiet, too clean, too bright. He'd never been anywhere like this before. A woman at the front desk smiled and asked his name. Moments later, an assistant appeared and led him through a hallway filled with photographs. Young people at conferences, shaking hands with politicians, working on laptops, laughing on school campuses. It felt like a different world, one he hadn't imagined he could ever be part of. Claire met him in a sunlit meeting room with a soft smile and warm eyes. "I'm glad you came, Darius," she said, offering him a seat. Sitting across from her was a man in a navy suit. Strong jaw, sharp eyes. Darius recognized him instantly. It was the man from the sidewalk, the one the police had pinned down. The man in the suit, Marcus. Darius froze. "That's him," Claire nodded gently. "Yes, Darius, I'd like you to meet Special Agent Marcus Ellis, FBI. Marcus reached out his hand. "Nice to meet you, young man. I owe you thanks." Darius hesitated, then shook his hand. I didn't do anything." "You didn't walk away," Marcus said. "That means something." Darius sat back confused. "What is all this?" Claire leaned forward. "What happened on that bus and what happened on that sidewalk? They weren't separate events. They were the beginning of something much larger, something that's now in motion." Marcus studied him. "You've heard of wrongful arrests before, right?" "Yeah, I mean, they talk about it online all the time." "Well, it's not just stories online anymore. You saw it with your own eyes. And that officer, Simmons, this wasn't his first time. We've been tracking his pattern for months, targeting certain kinds of people, discretionary stops, filed complaints that disappear before anyone sees them. Darius blinked, suddenly, realizing the full weight of what he'd witnessed. So that day, it was part of something bigger, Claire nodded. And you being there, your act of kindness, set off a chain of events we couldn't have predicted. It led to you. And now, it's leading to the truth. Marcus turned to Claire. He deserves to know what's next. She hesitated for a beat, then looked Darius in the eye. We want to offer you a scholarship, full tuition, room, board, mentorship, through our program. But more than that, we want you to be involved in something real, something that matters. There are other young people, like you, who need a voice. Someone they trust, someone who sees what's wrong before it becomes a headline. Darius stared at them, trying to process it all. Why me? Because you didn't wait for someone else to do the right thing, Marcus said. You did it. Before Darius could respond, Claire's assistant knocked gently and leaned in. Excuse me, Agent Ellis, there's a situation. Marcus stood immediately, his eyes sharp. What kind of situation? She lowered her voice. Internal Affairs just released a report. Simmons, he's gone off-grid, his phone's off. No contact and, she hesitated, he was seen near one of your agents' homes. They're putting out a quiet alert. Claire's face tightened. Darius looked between them. What's happening? Marcus didn't answer. He moved quickly toward the hallway. Stay here, he said. Both of you. But Darius wasn't the type to sit still when things got dangerous. He waited for the assistant to get distracted, then quietly slipped out the other door. The building buzzed with tension, agents on phones, murmured voices, computer screens lit with maps and data. Darius followed the noise until he stopped in front of a large monitor showing camera footage, street views, car plates, facial recognition matches. And there it was. Simmons wearing plain clothes, a cap pulled low near Marcus's house. The moment felt unreal, like watching a movie. But this was real. Too real. Marcus was already calling his wife. Lock the doors. Stay inside. I'm on my way. In the corner of the screen, a second feed popped up, body cam footage. From a few weeks ago. Simmons shouting, a teenager's voice shaking, a familiar voice. Darius leaned closer. It was Jamal, his friend. The timestamp was old, but the fear in Jamal's voice was unmistakable. Claire stepped beside him. You know him? He's my boy from school. Claire's face turned grim. We suspected there were others. Kids he intimidated,